My name is Rachel Castell, and I work for many festivals across the UK, actually. It's unusual for me to be in Germany, so I'm very happy to be here. And I have the privilege of speaking to some of the authors who are here this afternoon. First of all, I will be welcoming Elnathan John to the stage. That's right, yeah, give it up. Woo. So Elnathan actually is currently living in Berlin, but when you're not in Berlin, you live in Nigeria, correct?
I think it's the other way around.
Other way around. When you're not in Nigeria, you live in Berlin.
Yes, I live in Nigeria.
Great. And but luckily you're here at the moment. So and you write fiction and satire. So that means that when you're not making up stuff, you're writing about the world that we live in and critiquing it in your own special way. You have been shortlisted twice for the Caine Prize for African Writing, and your debut novel, Born on a Tuesday, was released last year in Nigeria and this year in the rest of the world, correct? Great. And I'll be inviting Elnathan to read from Born on a Tuesday in a moment. Then he and I will have a bit of a chat, and then we'll open up to the audience for questions as well. I'm going to sit down. So just to give a bit of background to the novel, the book explores religious extremism in Nigeria through the experiences of Dantala. I had to learn how to say this correctly. When you are reading and you say words in your mind, they are often different than out loud. And the name Dantala means, Dantala, translates as born on a Tuesday. Dantala is sent away by his father to attend Quranic school, and he falls in with a group of street boys. When they're hired by a political party to burn the headquarters of an opposition party, the police get involved, and Dantala must flee to save his life. He ends up in Sokoto State, where an imam called Sheikh Jamal takes him under his wing. Here he finds some stability and becomes friends with Jibril, who teaches him English. I like this. A language that sounds soft and easy, like one does not need to open one's mouth a lot or use a lot of air and energy. Unlike Arabic, where one uses everything: the neck, the jaws, the tongue. Dantala's world is not soft and easy. Horrific things happen. Prepubescent boys kill and commit atrocities for political ideologies they do not understand, and mothers depend on arms to feed their children. Hypocrisy abounds, corruption is rife. Young men are drawn to religious extremism. There is tension between Shia and Sunni Muslims, but also redemption in language and style. Of course, nothing is better than hearing from the book itself, so Elnathan is going to read a few passages for us now, and then we'll talk about the topics therein. You going to take the podium? You're a podium kind of guy?
Hello? Good. So, she's introduced the book as a very grim book. So I'm going to read a very light passage to begin, and then I will make my way from there. Hopefully it's light. It's my kind of light. Sometimes it is good to be invisible, to just go around the park doing my own thing and helping out in the mosque without anyone noticing me. Also, I don't have to share any stories that will put me in trouble. When one talks too much, one exposes oneself. I remember a boy who would not stop talking and told everyone about robbing and injuring a policeman, whose cousin was one of the men listening. That boy is still in prison. I don't like sitting with the boys around the mosque or the motor park because all they do is talk about whose penis is big and whose penis is small and whose penis is curved like a fishing hook. And every time Abdul Karim jokes about how he has to fold his penis 3 times before it can fit in his pants. And then someone told me that there was a time some boys wanted to see it when rumors started going around. When he refused to show them, they pinned him, held him down, stripped him, and stroked his penis until it became like a big, fat sugar cane. I have never seen it. Some people say it is a sickness to have such a big penis. I do not want to see it. So I'll be making my way through, for the next 3-4 minutes, tracing the development of this young man who grows up in northern Nigeria and is looking for a father figure. So the story, as much as it is about Islamic extremism is also about brotherhood, and it's about love, and it's about seeking growth, companionship, and finding meaning in life, in spite of all of the things that happen around. The day is just getting bright, and Chooks is opening his store. As he struggles with his many padlocks, I sit on the blackened bench outside. I think of all I would have said if the sheikh had asked me about my mother. I try to imagine Ummah now, fair, long face, deep dimples, dark circles around her eyes. She said her teeth were brown from the water they drank growing up. Her slender fingers and feet always have dark lalle tattoos on them. Sometimes they are reddish. Unlike her mother, Ummah is slim and tall. She says she gets it from her father. He fell from a date palm tree when she was little. Ummah is quiet and doesn't spend time gossiping with any of the women in Dogon Iche. She laughs softly, but when she does, her eyes are sad. I wonder what she thinks about when she sits by the zogale tree inside the house watching lizards run, or when she absently waves flies away from her body. Often when she complained that her chest hurt, my grandmother would tell her, "You think too much. What is in this world?" I enter the mosque and people are discussing the elections. My eyes are tired from looking for my money and my head hurts. Perhaps if I wasn't so tired or sick or angry from having lost all my money, I might have told them about Bayan Lai and the burnt big party office and the fat man that Banda set ablaze, or Tsohon soldier who Gobe Danisa killed with his machete. I would not say that I was there, that I held a machete too, that I was the one who hit the big party man. I would say only that someone told me. I lie down and block out all of the voices. Flashes of blood and mangled bodies on fire are going through my head. Allah forgive me. But some wee-wee would be good right now, so I could forget these images. If Banda were here, he would have given me some. We would have sat down under the kuka tree and talked about things that didn't matter until we fell asleep. I wake up to the bitter taste in my mouth and the muezzin's call to prayer in my ear. My bones hurt so bad, my back, my knees, my neck, my arms. It feels like someone has beaten me with iron rods. I'm trying to remember the dream I had. All I have are the images that come and go. Ummah sitting on her little stool with her back against the wall, beneath an old picture of Sheikh Inyas. Dark circles around her eyes from my father always punching her in the face. She said many things to me which I can't remember. I saw Banda with a hole in his chest and blood around his mouth. It's the part about Ummah I want to remember, especially what she told me. The man with the big voice is at the tap and his eyes are puffy from sleep. He's not talking and smiling like he was yesterday. He washes quickly and goes in to stand in front of the mosque behind the muezzin with a nicely patterned gray and black beard. Just before I go down on my knees, which still hurt a bit, I feel my pockets to make sure I still have my change left. A cold, light breeze blows from the door on my right after I just say, Allahu Akbar. It feels like Allah hears my whisper and answers. I can feel His greatness this morning, and I feel sorry for the first time for all I have done, for smoking wee-wee, for breaking into shops with the Kukatri boys, for striking that man with a machete, and for questioning Allah on my way back to Sokoto. I'll just read one more short passage before we sit. I have not been able to sleep since Sheikh told me that I will follow him to the deputy governor's office. The temptation to tell Jibril everything that Sheikh wants me to do with him is very strong, but I keep quiet because I don't want it to sound like I am bragging, especially now that I have started singing the call to prayer at the mosque. Wallahi, I love it more than I ever thought I could, closing my eyes, covering one ear with my hand, holding the microphone with the other, and singing, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu anna ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, Hayya ala salah. Hayya ala salah. Hayya ala falah. Hayya ala falah. It transports me to a deep place away from everything around me. The feeling is one of being lost inside myself, a dark, peaceful place. My lungs empty as I drag out each line. I breathe in to refill my lungs and empty them again. I am lost in that dark space until I say the last words, La ilaha illallah. I try to explain to Jibril, but he cannot understand how singing these words can give me the best feeling in the world, a feeling that drives out all pain, all fear, all worry, all want. I made him try it in the room. I told him to cover his ear, breathe in, relax, and pretend there was no one there, not even himself. He still didn't get the feeling. You can tell when a muezzin is enjoying the call or when he's doing it just because he has to, like Abu, who yawns into the microphone when he has to call the early morning prayers. If it was up to me, Abu would never call a prayer.
Thank you very much. That was actually an excellent selection to give us an insight into the complexities of Dantala's life and how he kind of moves through these different experiences. I was really interested to ask you where the genesis of the story, in particular of Dantala's character, came from. Where did you first sort of start to feel him as a person?
Well, as I write in the acknowledgements of my book, I met this one young man who was a scholar, an itinerant scholar, who came from a different city to Zaria, where I was, to seek Quranic education, as a lot of them do from many parts of the country, to renowned scholars, a system which has now become fraught with a lot of difficulties because of poverty and all of that. And so we have young men, gathered in schools, madrasas, who really have to go and beg for a living. And so the way people see them or the first contact they have often with these people is of boys who are begging for food. And so, especially Nigeria being a very multicultural, multi-religious space, there are many people who live in cities that know nothing about the cities they live in. And so they probably can't speak the language. And so when they see these boys, all they see is boys who could be used for violence. And so many of them they're not really interested in these boys except when there's violence. But for me, I started talking to a few of these boys, and I struck what you might call some sort of friendship with one of them. And we started talking, and even though I grew up around people like him, I realized how little I knew about him and about the struggles that he faced. And so I thought of what the life of an Almajiri, a young man who looks for Quranic education, would be like. People who leave their parents' homes and travel and have very little to hold on to by way of guidance or living conditions.
Yeah, and he's always sort of seeking people to find meaning through, because in the beginning there's his friend at Banda, and then obviously Sheikh Jamal, and so I guess he's always looking for family in a way, or looking for a place that he belongs. Does this young man that you became friends with, does he know that you were writing the book, and has he read the book at all?
Well, sadly, over the course of 4 or 5 years that I knew him, I couldn't really track him. And then one day he just disappeared. And for me, it was a very sad moment when I turned around and couldn't find him. But even worse, that no one else knew where he was or cared where he was. And so that is the plight generally of people like him. They come and they go, they disappear and reappear, and no one really asks. If 10 of them disappear, no one would know, because there's no record of birth, there's no record of death, and there is no way to track where they are, where they're going. So for me, that's a very important thing, keeping records, documenting the lives of people who matter more than we think they do.
Yeah, so even though this is a fiction, it is a document, an archive of its own. I mean, is that why you wrote it? Is that where the kind of the motivation came from to record and kind of pay respect to a life that is often not put down somehow.
No, I wrote it so that I could get rich.
Has it worked?
No. No, that's a joke. For me, the story sort of came to me before I started making meaning of the story. And so I didn't sit down to say, I want to, give this life a meaning. I thought of what I thought was a compelling story. And as the story unfolded in my head, I realized how big the story was. And it started as a short story. And after that, I knew that I had to do the novel. Some short stories are short stories and cannot be anything else. But then some stories demand to be written, and it would be doing great disservice to leave them in the short form.
Yeah. And what was your relationship? I mean, did you change as you were writing it? I mean, obviously you were learning as you went through the experience. Did you feel that it was a learning experience, a changing experience in some way for you?
Oh, certainly. I think that, yes, I can't remember how many texts and videos and scholarly articles I had to read and sermons I had to listen to before I finished this book. And of course, 80% of the material I studied I couldn't use because I was writing fiction, right? Yeah. And while I needed to know enough about the world that I was writing about, I had to be careful to this is not social commentary, it is fiction. That's what it is primarily. Whatever else it does, it does. But then that you can make fiction really laborious, and if you dump in all of that research. And there were times when I had to cut out whole chapters because it was doing just that. It was just offloading some interesting bits of research that I saw, and I'm thinking, oh, I certainly have to do something with this. But ultimately, I had to let a lot of it go.
Yeah, I mean, it's a story.
It is.
After all, yeah. I mean, obviously that's a skill that you must have because obviously this is your debut novel, is that right? But you've written columns and a blog that I've been reading, and
I've written
and
lots
short
of novels
stories.
in my head.
That's a good place for them to start.
Yeah.
But on paper and in print. So obviously you must have to have a self-editing process. I mean, was it harder? Was it different writing a novel for you? I mean, that process of self-editing and being really strict about what you can fit in.
Yes. It was very different. I mean, apart from self-editing, you also have the editors who, at some point, you will fight with if you care enough about the text. And so even the editing process was a learning process for me. Learning how to let go of certain things, learning to kill my darlings, learning that sometimes the story is bigger than you, and that sometimes you should just let the story tell itself.
Great. And in terms of, when you're speaking to editors, and also for yourself, I mean, I'm very interested in, I'm sure this isn't anything you think of when you're writing, but when it's out in the world, who is the story for, in a way? I mean, who is your readership?
I mean, this is a question I only contemplate long after the process is finished.
Yeah.
Certainly nowhere near when the process is going on.
Yeah.
Because for me, I think that when a story is compelling and demands to be told, then it should be told. The considerations that follow that should not affect the process of storytelling.
No, good.
It might affect, for example, things like the cover. Because then we'd say, oh, well, this cover would not work in this territory. That cover would work in that territory. But the story itself, I think, the worst kind of censorship for me is self-censorship. When you think, oh my goodness, I'm writing for this audience, and I shouldn't say penis because, maybe I should use another word. But then the only word I can think of is penis, right? No, that's not the only word I can think of.
Me too now.
No, but I'm saying that's part of the process.
Yeah.
Or should I take out, because when it was about to be translated into Hausa, the process is still ongoing. The first person we contacted to do the translation said, whoa, we can't do this. No, we have to take out some of the words. I said, well, my characters don't, this is how they speak. They don't stop and say, should I, talk about this or not talk about it? They just say what they say. And and that was, at that point I just said, no, we're not doing an abridged version because we're selling this in northern Nigeria. We're doing this version.
Yeah, the real version.
The only version.
The only version, exactly. I'm also interested in because as a reader, you're kind of witnessing and digesting in quite a kind of, not matter of fact, but very, very easily presented way, extreme violence. And I'm interested, you know, but you accept it and you are still empathetic to the characters, and I think that was quite an unusual experience for me. It's not something I've read that much that extreme of the kind of violence you're witnessing. Is that something that you know, how did you feel about that? And how do you feel about the characters? I mean, you're presenting people so sympathetically in many ways. It's a really unusual experience to feel that close to people who were really committing violent crimes.
Yeah, so, I mean, my experience of being told to the world, so in many ways I feel like I am being told to the world through news, through journalism, especially international journalism, mostly because the means of production in spreading the narrative is owned by a certain group of people.
Yeah.
So when those people who own the means of narrative production determine what is said about you, then in many ways you can only react. But for me, I think also in reacting, I also don't want to fall into their narrative by doing a counter narrative that does not do justice to the truth. So what I'm rambling to say is that it's easy to say that, oh my goodness, I do not want to portray Nigeria or Africa as this single story of violence. However, if you're writing a story that happens in an atmosphere of violence, to take out the violence would be reactionary and would be a lie, actually.
Yeah.
And so you have to, toe the fine line of talking about the stories that happen in spite of the violence, and emphasizing as you go that this story is not about violence. This story is not about the violence that happens in northern Nigeria. It's a story about brotherhood. It's a story about love. It's a story about faith. It's a story about development. It's a coming-of-age story that tells us, how boys learn what they learn, mentorship. It's a story about also how belief is passed on, and how people engage with theology. And how, for example, in Nigeria, politics and religion have this sort of relationship. And so the fact that it happens in an atmosphere of violence does not stop these other things from being real and being bigger than the violence.
Yeah. So this is interesting. I was going to save this question to the end, but are you an optimist? Because ultimately it does feel like an optimistic, hopeful narrative that does, like you say, elevate beauty, brotherhood, friendship, love above anything else. That feels optimistic to me.
Well, I like to say that I'm a storyteller, and I like to tell stories that I do not hear often. And even if I tell stories that I hear often, I like to add nuance to what I already hear. And whether that pushes me into the realm of optimism, well, if I try to tell the story as I see it. And I am very wary about writers playing God and saying, I'm trying to change the world, I'm trying to do this, I think that telling a story is strong enough. It is a great enough calling to just tell a story. Because one of the biggest things you can do or take away from the person is the power to say who they are, to explain themselves to the world. And so if you can take that power back and say, I will say my own story, it is a political act itself to say, I will tell a story. Because something as simple as that can cause generations of hurt. One of the things that makes us, for example, look the way we do is how our story is being told. As a Nigerian, I know how my story is being told. And I know that when I go to a border and they see a green passport, the story flashes in their head, and that's what they see. When I'm passing through London, for example, I take a lot of wine, and I tell myself to calm down because someone's going to say shit to me at the airport. And it happens without fail. And the last time I was at Gatwick, for example, this woman just kept me there for just she just kept me there, and she was flipping through my passport and asking me to account for 3 months of travel. Why were you here? You were in Zambia. What were you doing in Zambia? You know, and she kept going through it, and she said, okay, where were you in Schengen? Why did you spend so much time? And I thought, you know, and I just thought, you know, this is a story she knows. This green passport means trouble.
I feel responsible for the entirety of London now. So sorry.
So for me, telling your story is such a political act and such an act of great meaning that I just think it's unnecessary to add to it any sort of God complex, to say, well, I'm trying to change the world, I'm trying to do all of that. Because that is part of the problem. The people who claim that they're trying to change the world, everyone does. The religious extremists who say they want to take over the world, say they're doing it on behalf of God because they want to change the world. Because the world is not the way it should be. And everyone does that. And the good people think they're doing it for good. And I'm afraid of anyone who says that they're changing the world.
At this point, do you want to do another bit of reading?
I think I should.
Talking about narrative, we might well hear some. Do you want to give us a bit of context for the next, what's happening? Thank you.
So as much as this book is about the religion and the politics, it's also about language. It's about translation, and it's about meaning between languages and how things mean different things to different people. Tuning the radio to find stations, I find BBC Hausa and BBC English. I like BBC Hausa, especially the news. It is surprising that I learn new Hausa words from a foreign radio station. Comparing the news on BBC English to that on BBC Hausa is interesting. Sometimes I do not know a word in English, and I hear it in Hausa, and I understand. Other times there's a Hausa phrase I have never heard before, like Majalisar Ɗinkin Duniya, which BBC English calls United Nations. If I had not heard the English, I would have translated it to mean Association of Joining the World. But then if I had heard United Nations, I would have called it Inkakunkasashe in Hausa. Words turn into something else when they change from Hausa to English and back. I'm now moving to somewhere in the middle of the book where he comes in contact with a certain type of ideology that questions all of the things he's learned before. Malam Abdul Nur leads the prayer. I have never seen so many people in the mosque in my life. The mosque is fuller than the huge Jum'at one on Fridays. There are people standing on either side of the mosque. My stomach hurts from the policeman's kick. I do not know if it is this or the sheer number of bodies that is making it difficult to breathe. The two huge bearded men are standing guard and not praying with the rest of us. They are scanning the crowd angrily, grinding their teeth as if to scare anyone planning on attacking Malam Abdul Nur. No one moves after the prayer. One of the bodyguards brings Malam Abdul Nur a chair while Jibril sets up the microphone. It is as if everyone knows something that I don't. Malam Abdul Nur starts to speak, first slowly, but increasingly the veins of his neck begin to bulge like fat millipedes under his skin. He starts with a sermon about shirk, about how people worship persons other than Allah. There is nothing worse than shirk, and in this matter, some Christians are better than Shiites. You know, there are some Christians who don't elevate Prophet Jesus to the position of Allah, and they believe there is no one worthy of worship but Allah. They just don't call him Allah. Surely then the Shiites who set up gods in opposition to Allah are worse than Christians. Allah says in the last verse of Surah Al-Fath, Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and those with him are severe against the disbelievers and merciful among themselves. All around there's silence, and you can hear people breathing. The only thing that breaks it is the thunderous sound of Allahu Akbar that follows. There are goose pimples all over my skin. Malam Abdul Nur is in total control of the crowd. He starts to cry when he talks of our brothers who were shot. He's wagging his finger. He's crying. What have we ever done to the Shiites? What have we ever done but be merciful to them? We do not even follow the command of Allah to be severe against them. And how do they repay our mercy? By killing our brothers, by shooting our sheikh on the very day we launch our movement. But they cannot stop us. They cannot stop Jama'at al-Ihya Islam al-Haqiqi. The crowd roars and begins chanting, Haqiqi, Haqiqi. The fat man sitting to my right is chanting and crying and wiping his fingers and wiping his tears with his stubby fingers. I wish I wasn't sitting right in the center of this mosque where everyone will see me if I get up. The hot tears that are flowing from my eyes down my cheeks, I do not know where they are from, but I know they are not from this sermon. I am trapped in this mosque full of anger and tears, in my body full of pain, in my head full of confusion, in my heart full of fear. I do not know anything. I do not know what is happening to Sheikh or what Jibril is thinking. As the crowds begin to disperse, I sneak away to the hospital. There are 2 policemen where the bodyguards were standing earlier in the day. I lie down on the bench opposite the one I sat on before, which is now occupied by 2 older women. I turn, facing the wall, still wincing in pain from the kick, and start to see my mother again. Sometimes I wish I knew why Allah does his things, why he lets good people get shot and bad people get all the glory, why he lets bad people have gifts like the power to move crowds and convince people and make grown men cry. So I will, if I have 3 minutes, I'll read the last part.
3 minutes.
3 minutes, great. Okay. Hopefully this part is lighter than all the others. So at this point, toward the end of the novel, he's grown a little bit, and he's slightly, there's a young man in his 20s, and he's starting to learn new things as a deputy to the main sheikh, and he's learning how to use a computer and all of that kind of thing. I'm tired and sit to rest a bit in the office before going home. I turn on the computer and wipe the dusty keyboard with the tip of my kaftan. Saleh is a really filthy guy. I don't know how he can work on a table as dirty as this. There is everything: food remnants from the Indomie he orders from the Meishai near the mosque, oil, dust. I find a rag in the corner of the room and use some water from the plastic kettle to dampen it. I clean the computer monitor, then lift the keyboard to clean the table properly. There is a blank CD beneath the keyboard. I put it aside and continue cleaning. I'm thinking of Microsoft Excel. Saleh claims not to know how to use it. I do not know if he really doesn't know how to use it or if he just doesn't want to teach me. I lift the keyboard again and pick up the plain CD, open the CD drive and put it in. It is weird how much I like hearing the hum as the drive spins the CD. Windows Media Player comes up and the CD starts playing. It begins abruptly and I almost jump out of my seat. A man is sitting down naked and a naked white woman kneels before him and starts to rub his penis. Then she starts sucking until she takes the whole penis in her mouth. At first it is disgusting how each time she appears to be about to throw up because of how he's pushing his penis deep into her mouth. A chill is passing through my body. I shut the windows and close the door. My penis is getting harder and harder until I feel my head about to burst. I stop the CD, put it back under the keyboard and turn off the computer. Still, my head and chest feel like they're about to burst, my penis still getting harder. It has never been this hard before. Images from the CD flood my mind. All I can see is the woman with the man in her mouth. I loosen my trousers, pull up my kaftan, suspend it with my chin, and start to stroke. I close my eyes and I see the naked white woman, then the naked prostitute behind the tipper garage, and then my mind changes the woman's face to Aisha's, and she's the one having me in her mouth. I stroke harder and harder, and then the door just swings open. I freeze in the chair. Sheikh looks at me and steps into the room. My chin releases the kaftan and it falls over my penis. You know, Sheikh begins, hiccuping. If every man were to be instantly judged for their sins, there would hardly be anyone left standing. I feel like the earth beneath me should part and swallow me. It feels like walking through a wedding ceremony with shit on my face. I will tell you a story, he says. I move in my seat and tighten my trousers slowly beneath my kaftan. Before people started calling me Sheikh, before anyone knew me in this motor park, maybe even before you were born, I had a wife. Not this one here with me now, another one, my cousin. Asia was her name, the one I loved before I knew anything. I loved her before I knew what a woman was. The room is suddenly very hot. I didn't know what marriage was. My father had arranged my marriage and I took it all for granted. And what did I know? Even when I met Hawa, who owned the restaurant near my house, what did I know? The first time it happened, Hawa cried for days and made me swear I would never tell Asia. Then she made me agree that I would take her as a second wife. And when I agreed and tried to meet her people, she refused, saying she had changed her mind and didn't want to be a second wife. Of course, I could not do that to Asia, send her away after less than 1 year because I wanted to marry another person. And Asia, who trusted me more than she trusted anyone in the world, didn't suspect anything. She would beg me sometimes when she was not feeling strong to go to Hawa and buy some food. I had promised Asia when we were marrying that I would never take a second wife. She said, "No, don't make me that promise. It is sunnah for you to take another wife. I cannot let you swear to do something that Allah has made halal for you. It is your right." "Yes," I said, "but it is not wajib. I do not have to." So I swore I never would. One day she came home earlier than she should have. You know, it's not as if we had GSMs back then. And she caught us, Hawa and I, in the living room without any clothes on. Sheikh drags a chair and sits. I shuffle in my seat, fold my arms across my lap. He is looking at the ground between us. "So," I clear my throat. "What happened?" "I left her." Not she, I, because I had breached her trust. And when I thought how each time I would go out and she would suspect that I'd been with another woman and always live in fear that I would take another wife, I could not go on like that. She forgave me. We didn't even have to talk about it. She just asked me, "Will you marry her?" And when I said no, she said, "Poor woman." We never talked about it again, but then each time I saw that fear in her eyes when I needed to talk to her about something, or when I returned home, she would stare deep into my eyes as if she was waiting for me to say I was going to bring another woman home. I could not just keep paying for that moment and being with someone who would never trust me again. So I left her. And you know, my friends, they insulted me. They said I was taking my wife too seriously. And they were right. I did take her seriously. She was the best friend I had. It feels like we are both standing naked in this room, and I do not know which is worse, his nakedness or mine. I look up at him and he looks up too. Are you waiting for me to say something? That's the end of my story. He gets up and walks to the door. Were you wondering what the moral of the story was? He asks, turning around. Yes, Sheikh, I reply. There's no moral. I just felt like telling you a story.
Thank you. So I think we have about 5 minutes left. So if anyone has any additional questions from the audience, please do let me know. I don't know if we have a roving microphone at all. No. You've wowed them with your literary readings. Well, one thing I wanted to talk to you about, I mean, you talked about translating, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, this is my perception, but you work as a... Oh, are you going to be... Thank you. Yeah, I'll share my microphone with you. It's fine, you've earned it. But yeah, you're sort of, I mean, you work as a columnist, you're writing a lot, you're writing commentary. So in a way, you're sort of translating the world and your experience for people who can't access it through the book as well. Okay, thank you. And I wondered actually, I mean, from my perspective, that seems actually like quite a brave act to be talking on behalf of people and asserting your own opinion about things, sometimes making fun of them. Do you feel that way? Do you feel like you're doing something that's potentially quite brave?
No, actually, I don't. I think that is something that everyone should be doing. And so it's actually, I'm all for the normalization of what we call heroic acts, you know, and I don't like the whole idea of heroes or people who are doing great things just by doing things that everyone should be doing. And so I think that we should normalize these great acts, these brave acts. So, for example, to tell a story should not be a brave act. The problem is that, and it makes us sad, the world that we live in, that doing something as basic as saying the truth is a brave act, because we live in a space where no one does, you know. And so, for me, I think of myself as following a great tradition of people trying to take their narrative back. And I often like to say that I'm not an ambassador. I do not represent anyone. I do not speak for anyone, because that, I think, is a bit presumptuous also. Because I do not speak for the poor Almajiri who I'm writing about. I haven't lived their life. All I can do is tell a story. You know, I do not speak for example, the women in my book, because how could I speak for them? You know, I do not speak for anyone, actually. And what I try to do is, if everyone tells a story the way they know it, as truthfully as they can, then a lot of the problems that we have will be solved, because everyone would be represented in a way that they want to be represented. And then we wouldn't even need to tell another person's story, because then everyone would be able to tell their own story.
Do you think that it's perhaps more difficult or challenging, or people don't do it so much because the age we live in allows immediate critique and comeback, so that you know that as soon as you put something out there, you're going to be, somebody has an answer to it, or you're judged on it?
In a way, the freedoms that we have now, and which have been made even better by things like the internet, also have, I wouldn't say a downside, it has a potential loophole for people who want to take advantage of it. It means that now the space for conversation is shrinking, and people cannot speak the truth because everyone is afraid to say anything. Because we all want to be popular, we all want to get retweets and likes on Facebook. We all want friends. And so we toe the general, you know, safe line and not actually say what we think. You know, and that's why, for example, we have a lot of people who do horrific things, and we say, I knew that man, he loved cats, you know, like, how did he do such a horrific thing? But because the public space is so closed, people are doing things that we do not, you know, in closed space, and they can't speak up about it, you know. And I'm all for that space. There was an event very quickly that I attended, and it was an LGBT event, which is very rare in Nigeria, and very brave of the organizers. I can say that for once. But then there were people who came to that event and didn't know anything about anyone there, but just came in because they were interested. And a certain woman stood up and she said, I want to ask a question that may seem stupid. What do homosexuals want? And then she explained that, you know, she just hears this, she's never met one, she doesn't know what it means, but that please, she wants us to understand for her, she grew up thinking there was no homosexual. And then she came to a room full of people who were, you know, in the LGBT community. And one great thing about that event, and I learned a lot just from watching at the way they handled it, was that they told her, thank you very much for coming into this room and wanting to learn. Yes. And they gave her a sort of a crash course in sexuality and all of that. And the woman left there so, I mean, I'm not saying this is the engagement that should happen, because really, you know, we don't have time to be engaging everyone on that level. But I'm just saying that we need those kind of spaces where genuine people can actually come and learn. If she did that on the internet, on Twitter or Facebook, as soon as she does something like that, would have all shut her down. I would have shut her down. Yeah. But she came into that space and asked a question like that, and people were able to teach her. But of course, because of the way she came.
And they also learn from her how much people don't know, and that they are keen to learn. Yeah. I think we have a question, so I'm going to donate my microphone.
Nathan, thanks very much. That was a lovely, lovely reading and session. Rachel, thank you. I was very interested in how you spoke about telling stories, and it should just be a mere act, not necessarily a brave or a political act. But all stories, Nathan, you know, are said in a context. one context is the green passport that you have. The other context is of Chinua Achebe's and the long tradition of Nigerian storytellers in English. In present-day circumstances, Chimamanda Adichie and the rest. Chimamanda talks about the single story which you spoke about and the need to not have multiple stories and not just one single story. So the question, therefore, I want to ask is, how can it be apolitical at all, storytelling? And do you feel, on one hand, encumbered by the massive problems of the green passport and its immediate associations, or the long tradition which you have starting of Nigerian storytelling in English?
Well, what I said was that it is actually a political act. So I'm agreeing, I'm saying it is political. Just telling a story, because the skewing of stories has been a long tool for putting people down. I would say that I cannot pretend not to be affected by the green passport. And also, sometimes you have to fight the associations that instantly come with you being a Nigerian writer in English. Because on both ends, people try to pigeonhole you. I remember once somebody submitted something about my novel, and the first thing they said is writing in the tradition of Achebe. And for many reasons, my publisher said, no, we don't want this association, because of the person who was making the association, not because of what we were being associated with. The reason is also that people are lazy, and they just want to associate with you with Chinua Achebe, when in fact we have many rich traditions, multiple traditions, and Nigeria is such a diverse country that really it's quite lazy of anyone to just think of Achebe when they think of Nigerian writing. There's so much writing that's come out of Nigeria. In fact, if you think of writing in Nigeria that's not in English, we even have more diverse body of writing. So I think I'm affected by both things, and by the positive aspects of both things and the negative aspects of both things. And writing as a Nigerian especially is towing that line and trying to find a balance between these two things. Because the question you get asked, are you an African writer? Why do you say you're not an African writer? Or are you an Afropolitan? Why are you not an Afropolitan? Do you agree that, why are you writing in English? Why are you not writing your mother tongue? And every time we speak about literature, we end up being sidetracked with all of these questions of identity, who you are, where you are, when in fact we already have talked about our identity in our text. Our text speaks about the identity, but then we speak about these side things, and everyone forgets the text. So that many times people see the writer, and the writer is famous, and not many people know the text. So for me, I always like to say, go back to the text. Go back to the text. I'm a writer, I'm a storyteller, read my story. There's a reason why I wrote 270 pages. I don't want to be answering everyday questions about this identity when I've already written about it. And this, for me, is the identity. Read the book. This is how I answer the question,
This is a perfect segue. I have to wrap up now. I know we've reached the end of the session, but it's a perfect segue into saying if you do want to read the book, it is on sale at a stall at the back. So just I thought I'd get that in there, as are all books by the authors who are here this afternoon. So we can pick up on your advice there and read the text. So I'm just going to say thanks very much to Elnathan John. I'm sure you'll help me do that with your applause. Thanks very much. And there'll be a short break and then on to the next session.